Thank you so much for joining. We will get started because I know there's a few people who are going to jump in and out a little bit. And this will be recorded anyway, as you all know. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Let me just check I've hit the record button. Yes, we're all good. Marina, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to listen to this. And I have to say, I did a post on my Instagram earlier on just saying, when we started the sanctuary, it was very much about other people's voices and quite selfishly other people's voices that I also wanted to hear and listen to and take lessons from. And Marina is definitely one of those people. We met via LinkedIn, as with many of us on this platform, several months ago now, and just connected from an ex-funded founder perspective, and a lot of the stresses that we carry as founders in that position. And now obviously her work, which we're going to go through today. So for those of you who are new to the Mastery Sessions, this is our first one for cohort 2. Typically we'll invite expert speakers from my network background, mentors, investors, and so on, to come in and talk to us about a specific topic. And we'll kick off with just a little bit of a conversation between myself and Marina, just to understand her background and perspective. And then we'll move into Marina taking the floor so that she can walk us through her point of view on founder mindset, why it's so important, and how we can all do it, because let's face it, if we don't have that right, then it's very difficult to get everything else right in our day, our plans, our vision, and so on. So welcome, Marina. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm going to kick off just by asking you very quickly to give us a rundown on your founder journey. So before you started your current business.
Yeah, so I'm an entrepreneur myself. I've been running my own ventures since I was 25. God, it seems like a long time ago now. But I've been kind of doing a lot of things, really, from the marketing agency to VC-backed car business, actually, which is quite interesting. But throughout that journey, raising money, leading people, scaling a business, I've been always struggling with my own mental health, which actually at that point I didn't really realize. I realized it many years after, because kind of when you're in that pace of building, there's very little time often to reflect actually on what's going on and what kind of support do you need, which I now often kind of see with, my clients. But essentially what it did, it kind of ended me feeling quite depressed, having the burnout, stepping out of my business. And that's what's landed me into psychotherapy training. So, not something that I've planned or expected at that point of my life, but here we go. Life is always wonderful and unpredictable, as much as entrepreneurship, but that was really the best move, because I kind of found something that I believe is my purpose. And since I've been kind of, since I've trained as a psychotherapist, I've been working with leaders, founders, teams, kind of helping them scale their businesses while also having a deeper understanding of their own psychology and what kind of support do they need to make things happen for themselves. Oh, I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
My fault. I muted myself there. Looking back, in terms of your journey and your experience of building businesses, you mentioned that at the time you wouldn't necessarily have had the framing or the words to understand what it was you were going through from a mental health perspective.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain to us what that felt like for you at the time and what you now kind of know it to be? What were some of those emotions and behaviors, I suppose, that were surfacing at that point?
Well, I think there are quite a few things, just kind of something that was really present for me when I was kind of, first of all, I really thought that I wanted to be a CEO. by some reason, I thought that's what I wanted. I wanted to have a business. I wanted to scale a business. I wanted to have, all of those things. I couldn't quite understand at that point why, what was driving me in that ambition, and I think ultimately a lot of that was kind of based on getting some external validation or confirmation that I'm capable, I can do it, which, for many of us is rooted obviously early on. Right. For me, it was rooted in kind of wanting my father to approve me. There's a story to that kind of deep hunger, like around I need to show everyone. And I think ultimately that created quite a lot of demands and pressures, on myself, because it was something that I really felt I needed to do, as opposed to I'm doing it to self-actualize, I'm doing it to make an impact, I'm doing it because it's exciting, I'm doing it to learn, whatever it is. Right. And essentially, because kind of things were happening really fast, I raised money. And then I think like I went from having a team of a couple of people, to having a team of 50, like in the space of a couple of months. And I had no idea literally what the hell I was doing, because we're not really taught leadership skills, we're not actually taught relational skills, but there's this expectation that you're going to figure it out. And surely I wasn't going to go to my board and tell them, hey guys, you just put 4 million in the company. By the way, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And so there was like very little outlets where I could really bring all of that stress internally, and I think also because when you are in that position, kind of your network in a way perceives you as like very capable and strong, and you have everything under control. So that kind of limits how much help you can ask. And I think at that point, I just really didn't think, I needed help. I just like thought I was kind of, yeah, I was quite delusional.
And you brought up some really interesting points there, I think, around the facade that we all feel we need to carry as others, whether that is on social media or on platforms like LinkedIn, whether it's in the press, whether it's in front of our employees, even in front of our family sometimes. There is just this sense that we need to look like we know what we're doing, and we need to look like we are making progress, even if everything behind the scenes is sort of falling apart. And I was actually having well, maybe not falling apart, but challenging, right? Always challenging. There is never a point where things are not challenging when you're building a business, because you're trying to build something new. And that creative process is difficult for anybody. It doesn't matter whether you've been through it before or not. I was actually talking to a founder earlier on, specifically about the board point that you brought up. And the fact that there was nowhere to go to release pressure. You had to pretend to be this person who had it under control, because otherwise you were going to lose people's trust. Is that something that you see in founders today? Because I feel like that's definitely kind of a very traditional viewpoint. Is that something that's still a problem for founders today? And if it is, what do you recommend for people to get around that?
I think in my case, I was very fortunate, and I kind of know it doesn't happen often, in VC-backed businesses, because obviously there's a lot of stress that can come from that, like investor relationship and the dynamics. I happen to have an amazing board, and all the people kind of that invested in my business were really great, all in their unique ways, and kind of offering me the support. I think it was more my limitations and what I thought I couldn't ask for. So it was, I don't know, it was my own shame. It was kind of the stigma that at that point I was, thinking of, and kind of, so I think maybe, we obviously don't know what would have, how it would go, but I imagine they would be actually quite open to offer some support, just because obviously they knew this is the first time I'm scaling a business, and I had a lot of like issues with founder, which again is really typical,
Yeah.
you know. So I think from that perspective, I think very often it's our own limitations in kind of how we think about those issues and what weight do they carry for our own kind of self-esteem that stops us from reaching out and kind of saying, hey, I need support. And not so much because things are falling apart, but just because of what you've said, you know, because building a business is a journey where you're going to have many challenges and you are going to navigate them. You haven't done it before. So you just need actually sometimes someone who can offer some kind of space, you know, even to learn those relational skills, you know, how to build a team, how to choose a co-founder, how to resolve conflict. So, but I definitely hear from founders, you know, kind of answering your question, that there is still quite a lot of stigma when it comes to, you know, mental health. So, you know, and one of our goals actually, what we do it Unspoken, which is, you know, mental health academy, what that I'm developing now, is to kind of raise awareness and to work with VCs, to work with accelerators, to kind of remove some of those barriers, because because we believe that investors need to be part of this conversation, and you know, they kind of almost need to not like so much give psychological permissions, but to be like a part of this discussion, that psychological support is as important as, I don't know, legal, financial, whatever is now is offered, you know, with all these programs. But psychological support is the one that actually is going to make, I believe, the most impact for entrepreneurs.
I mean, obviously, I completely agree with you, and that's why we started the Founder Sanctuary as well. And you know, when you were talking about the perspective of this being more kind of fiction than fact in many respects, right? It's kind of your own perception or your own way of dealing things or your own past experiences or biases or whatever you want to call them that are coming into play, magnified by a million, right? When you're in a very pressurized position. Do you think that that is something that women face more than men, or do you think women are just more likely to talk about these things?
You know, that's a really good question. You know, I often think about that, obviously, you know, because I work with a lot of female entrepreneurs, and obviously because I'm a female therapist and entrepreneur. But, you know, I've always happened to work with a very male dominated businesses myself. You know, obviously, kind of, I've been in a car and automotive business for a very long time. I feel like still VC is quite a male dominated business, you know, and I think it's what, 5% of women are getting investments. I'm not sure about the numbers, but something like that. You know, so there's like still this huge disbalance. So obviously, you know, it would create a lot of additional pressures.
Yeah.
And you think, you know, there's so many like societal expectation and stigma around being, you know, like a working mom and what you're expected to do and how much time you can spend in your business. So I think all of that, you know, of course, it would add a lot of pressures. But, you know, having said it, I also kind of feel that we can choose the box we climb into. And, you know, I always kind of say to my clients that only you can choose that. You know, the society cannot put you in a box, but you can. So I think ultimately it's up to us to decide what kind of, if we want to climb into any of the boxes that society creates for us, or we don't. And, you know, I believe that we don't have to. So, but yeah, for sure, you know, I hear from a lot of my clients that there are a lot of extra pressures that come, you know, and there are a lot of different ones, you know, culturally, you know, for minority founders, you know, all of that. So I think there are a lot of kind of things that are going to influence that journey that, again, is very often not kind of taken into consideration.
Yeah, I love your perspective on being able to choose and stopping your mind from kind of running and telling you stories and listening to, you know, whoever's voices might be in your head at that particular point, and just saying, no, you know, I reject that as a philosophy, as a perspective, as an idea. And this is actually is how I see things and how I'm going to manage things, and how I'll build and I'll grow. And
Yeah.
that's just as important for mindset as it is for anything else when you're building a business, right? You wouldn't believe everything that everybody told you from a legal point of view or a sales point of view or a marketing point of view. You'd be selective about how you approach that, and you'd manage that process. And I think your mind is a space that can also be managed, which is, why we're
Yeah,
running this session.
yeah. And I think it very much goes into not believing everything that you tell yourself
Yeah.
about you. As in because I think this is the main difference that I see with the leaders who are kind of successful in whatever they want to do. And success has a very different definition to all of us, right? So I'm not kind of talking about this LinkedIn version of success. I'm talking about whatever version of success you have for you and your life and your business. And I think this thing that kind of I see is the difference about people who are successful with their goals and not, is that it's that kind of understanding and awareness around their own psychological process, and a kind of understanding of different parts of themselves,
Yeah.
and how some of those parts can just sabotage whatever we want to do. And I think having that awareness where you're not rejecting or fighting with those parts, but you actually know how to relate to them, is really what kind of distinguishes people who make it and people who get so caught up into kind of their own process that they really don't have capacity to build, they don't have capacity to create, because a lot of their energy is just actually spent on overcoming that internal struggle or a challenge. And I think this is where this psychology plays such a significant part, in how we present ourselves and what we do.
I think it's super interesting. We can all kind of hold ourselves back from things that we're actually very, very capable of. And I put my hand up to that as well. So okay, we're going to move into your session now, Marina. So I'm going to sort of hand the floor to you, because I just want to leave some questions at the end. I imagine we might have some. So I don't know if you wanted to share your screen, or if you just wanted to everyone to mute their microphone.
Yeah. I don't like to talk at people, and because we're such a small group here, I would love to kind of share whatever you think would be helpful for you. I mean, I don't kind of know, are you all founders in terms of where are you in your journey, but kind of if you have anything that would be helpful for you to receive, let me know, because I think this is just like an opportunity, because we have a small group, to have that dialogue. And I don't want to just talk at you and throw
Yeah.
things at you that might not be useful. So yeah, so just kind of if there is anything like around, obviously, mindset, so yeah, anything about what I do that can be helpful to you guys in your journey.
Do you want to just quickly run through how you might run a session with a client, and then it will give people some hooks, I think, to kind of move into your way of thinking.
Sure. So I guess, kind of essentially what we focus on at Unspoken, but also in my psychotherapy practice, like essentially it's a very similar work, it's to helping people to understand their own process better as they scale. So, it kind of involves like understanding of their own drivers, of kind of what's driving me in my goals, because very often we don't actually know, because we think we want to scale a business because we want autonomy, right? Or we want to scale a business because we want like that recognition or validation, or we want to scale a business because we kind of need money, whatever it is. But then behind all of that is usually unresolved emotional needs that we have that might kind of push us towards doing what we are doing. But very often, because those needs are unconscious, right, and we're not aware of them, they would really impact our motivation, they would impact how we do things, they would impact how we relate, and all of that. They would also impact the levels of um, fun and enjoyment, right, we're going to feel on the way. So when kind of we work with the founders, we kind of help them to understand in the first instance, why am I building this? what's really the drive behind me wanting to do that. And and who am I doing it for? Because very often we do things not for ourselves, right? We might think that we do it for ourselves, but we actually have those hidden motives of why we're doing that. And I think from that point comes out like a lot of new awareness, or also some of the personality traits that we have or don't have that are helping entrepreneurs or not. Because I believe that entrepreneurs are quite unique in a way how their personality is structured, right? Because not everyone is going to be an entrepreneur, not everyone is going to be a founder. So there are actually things that make people to be really good at, tolerating risk, tolerating uncertainty, going kind of to having like a pace, kind of being comfortable with hypervigilance sometimes.
Yeah.
All of those things very often come from our early histories, right? So what for some people can be really kind of uncomfortable place to be, for entrepreneurs is like, that's familiar, you know and for example, like being extroverted, and it's not to say that all entrepreneurs are extroverted, but if you're kind of going out there, if you're pitching, if you're selling your business, if you're building a brand, that's the personality trait that can be helpful to have. But then a lot of founders who are not extroverted, they would find it incredibly demanding and exhausting
Yeah.
doing all of those things, right? It
Yeah.
does, they're not going to succeed, but it means that mentally they're going to be really challenged, as they have to push themselves to do that. And then, they would kind of need to psychologically think again, what kind of support do I need, for example, from finding a co-founder who might carry some of those personality
Yeah.
traits that is
Yeah.
going complement, what kind of I'm lacking, or I'm not just really interested in doing, right? Because we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. And I believe that not every weakness we need to overcome.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just need to focus on doing things that we do really well, and
Exactly.
work with people who are equally as bright and autonomous in what they do
Have
well.
different strengths. Yeah. No, I completely agree. You sort of need your opposite. I always think you need your opposite brain in a co-founder, someone who's good at all the stuff you're not very good at. Okay, well, let's look at this then as a kind of open therapy session, if you like. I think, Alice, you put something in the chat that I
Yeah,
just,
I'm just reading it.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to just explain that a little bit, Alice?
Yes. So already have a business that works and have a base level, and developing something new in the past, I've just gone for it. I've just gone, okay, I'll give it a go. And they've all went fine. But actually, at the moment, I'm probably in a bit of a mindset where I'm overthinking. Like I can see the potential of something, but because it has a bigger weight to it, it feels a bit heavier. So that kind of fear of failing, going into something that's slightly new territory and failing at it feels a bit overwhelming. And I know this is my own brain just sort of tick-tocking backwards and forwards. I'm aware of this. But yeah, that's one thing that I think is comes up. So for me, the timing has to be right. And if I feel like it's not right, then I feel that that's just makes you more vulnerable, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Just to say, this is not a therapy session,
No,
by the
no, it's
like
not.
a lot of ethical problems with that. So just to give a disclaimer, and I'm going to respond like in a very kind of general terms
Yeah.
to what you've said, but kind of tell me if you want more. Okay, I think actually this whole narrative about fear of failure is really interesting, because I actually believe that most people don't have that fear, but I think what most people have is the fear of success. I think because actually, if you think about times in your life where you did fail, because all of us did, actually, even like starting with being a toddler and learning to walk, think of how many times we actually have to fail, literally fall, right? To learn a very simple developmental, task, right? So if you kind of have, if you know a toddler who is only kind of learning to walk, you can observe it and count how many times they hurt themselves, they actually fall to be able to walk. And you've all obviously done it, right? So I believe that fear of failure is one of those constructions that we actually tell ourselves, because as a matter of fact, we all failed a huge number of times, and a lot of things that we do. If you're a parent, like me, for example, you probably failed, I don't know, 100,000 times, So I feel like this is like something that we're very much equipped to tolerate because we've done it so many times that it's almost like it's part of the journey, and we have the capacity to do that. Yes, it sucks. Yes, it's unpleasant. Yes, it's painful. But if you were to think about your level of tolerance to that, we've all done it. So we all know how to tolerate it. But I think when it comes to success, when we're like about to do something that we think can be, maybe it can be big on a different level, or maybe it's like so kind of meaningful to us that we just never done it, or it really matters, or we're kind of really need this to be successful, that idea, that is what's overwhelming. And I think like this is where we might kind of feel stuck, because for our nervous system, it doesn't feel safe. And if it doesn't feel safe, then unconsciously we're going to do anything to stop ourselves from doing it. We might overthink, we might procrastinate, we might tell ourselves, I'm not the right person for it. Maybe I need to go and like study something. Maybe I need to go and hire someone. Maybe I need to go and like talk to this person, whatever it is, right? I'm not ready. So I believe that's kind of what is the root of us not taking a risk. And, so I think in a way it's kind of helping yourself to feel safe with whatever outcome is going to happen. And I think it's feeling safe that it can actually work other than it can fail is a bigger challenge, because I think this is where most of people will feel terrified. Because for many, it would mean, so many things, that how is my life going to change? How much responsibility I'm going to have? How much time I will need to commit to that? What will happen to my relationship? I think those are things that unconsciously can, stop us from taking those steps that we need. How does that sound, Alice?
Yes, actually flipping it round is much better, because you're right. I mean, I failed at all sorts of things. And I tell lots of other people this, that they're always just stepping stones, aren't they? It is just a stepping stone to something else. But I think you're right. I think it's probably thinking about the outcome, being safe with, well, actually, if I launch something, then that's okay. Like without, going back and almost like, what if you do and what if you don't? And if I don't, then it will never go out there.
Yeah. I think ultimately it's what's called the stress tolerance skills. So I think it's kind of like something that, we're, I guess, learn early on, or we don't learn early on. And I think because many of us don't learn it early on, then we're going to do a lot of things to stop ourselves from experiencing something that we feel might be overwhelming for us, and I think there's one thing that psychotherapy training is really good at, and this is what I always kind of remind myself when I work with clients, is that you do have to disattach yourself from the outcome. I mean, obviously we want our business to succeed, obviously we kind of have a very specific idea of how it's going to happen, but ultimately the only thing that we can manage is what we do now here. The past is only information. Today is where you can take action, and the growth is in the future. So I think if we just like focus on how can you ground yourself today to take whatever steps that you need to take, and while you just disattach, because this is uncertainty. If we could predict what happens in the future, well, that's an amazing business to have, right? If we could actually know for sure that we'll do this and this is what's going to happen, but we don't. So ultimately, it all kind of is about how we manage the stress and uncertainty. And this is kind of what you can manage and, today.
Is there, I mean, are there any, because you mentioned at the beginning around, burnout, and I think everybody on this call has probably been there at some point, whether it's with a business or a career. Are there kind of, number one, I suppose, ways to recognize that? And number two, when you're feeling, burnout is a big word, right? It's actually not something that happens on a day-to-day basis. It happens over a longer period of time. But if you feel that kind of creeping up, or if you feel that you're getting into that sort of negative mindset or whatever, are there any ways of kind of resetting yourself? Is there anything that you would recommend?
So I just want to say like specifically about burnout, because there's so much like around burnout, which is very much kind of pop psychology. You have a burnout, go, I don't know, for self-care, whatever it is, and then you're not going to feel burnout. Burnout is a medical condition. So kind of this is a condition that you would need to get a lot of support clinically in psychotherapy. So this is normally what we call like a burnout is 2 years after our nervous system actually started experiencing something that we can't quite digest. Right. So there's going to be a long period of time where we're going to experience a lot of things, which we just ignore, because part of again, like this journey and the pace of building a business is that we don't switch off, right? And we kind of can be in those cycles of doing, again, where we just don't have capacity to sit down and reflect, okay, where am I at, unless you actually make that space for yourself. So, I think burnout, most of founders who come to me with a burnout, they would be already a year or more than that, like experiencing those symptoms. And I think it's prevention other than management, because again, it takes a long time to recover from the burnout. And actually, if you were to think about, what you want to do, the main thing you need to do as an entrepreneur is to actually pay attention to your mental health. Because I think when it's someone was telling me yesterday, we had a meeting with my colleagues, who also work with the founders, and they were talking about a founder who raised, I think, 100 million, and then he collapsed in the board meetings, like in the board meeting, so that's just an example of how draining the journey can be and how like much people push themselves. And I think it's really quite an old and unhelpful narrative that you need to literally kill yourself and neglect yourself to be successful. Why do you need success if you're going to go and check yourself in hospital, or if you're to go and, or if you're going to go and repair your relationship because you haven't actually spent any time or resources on, nurturing those relationships, so I think it's more like preventative.
And if you, I mean, I know it's difficult because everybody is different, right? But if you as a founder are in a situation where you're just on the cusp of just feeling massively overwhelmed, stressed, you're becoming obsessive about whatever the problem is that you're trying to solve, or whatever the day-to-day challenges you're having are, is there something you can kind of do to reset that? Is there some way that you can kind of stop that cycle and step back? Because I do feel like, as a multiple founder in the same way that you are, I go, I've been through those cycles multiple times, and it is very difficult to stop yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really biased, obviously. I'm going to say psychotherapy, but I think ultimately, it starts with an awareness, it starts with kind of understanding noticing where am I at in terms of my nervous system, you know, kind of how am I actually feeling, you know, what is this kind of, is this hypervigilance, you know, am I actually within my window of tolerance, you know, how do I repair my nervous system, what support do I have? It doesn't have to be therapy, right? Any kind of vehicle of support, you know, whatever relationship that you might have for yourself, where you can actually have a space to reflect on what do I need to keep going, you know, maybe I don't know, like what skills do I need, or what support do I need, or what kind of tool do I need with this obsessive thoughts, right? Or kind of I'm not sleeping for 2 weeks, you know, so what do I need to be able to kind of help my nervous system to come down a little bit, at least so I can have some repair, you know, because obviously kind of when we work with founders, you know, I'm not going to tell a founder slow down and go to meditate for like 2 days, you know, because that's just unrealistic, you know, and that's not really needed, because actually even with the meditation, like entrepreneurs can make it something that's a challenge.
Yeah.
And I really believe that for most founders, they're not going to be able to meditate just because of how much is happening, how many like racing thoughts, how kind of overstimulated they are. I actually don't believe that it's even possible for many entrepreneurs. And that's why a lot of like entrepreneurs, you know, they take those cortisol driven activities, you know, oh, like we have a day off, we're going to run a triathlon, you know, or we have a day off, we're going to jump from a helicopter, you know, or we're going to go whatever, ride a shark, something, you know, which is like so cortisol driven that actually, again, it doesn't give space for their nervous system to repair.
Yeah.
And that's why I think like those therapy sessions in a way is the only space where they can like have that time to kind of reflect and understand and use that to build whatever they need that then can help them to sustain that growth and that pace.
Yeah, and I think, you know, hopefully having spaces like this, having spaces where we're coming together and working on ourselves or on our businesses, rather than just being constantly bombarded by stuff and ideas quite a lot of the time. I mean, entrepreneurs are incredible idea machines, and sometimes that can just be, you know, shiny object syndrome, where you're just going from this to this to this to this, particularly when you get to a certain level, and that can also be a massive challenge. Is anybody in this particular group, would anyone say they are at that point now or struggling with any of those types of things, if they're happy to share, or recently struggled? No, all good. Good. Okay. So awareness is really the first point at which we need to understand that, and then to step back and to get some help and assistance.
Yeah, and just Helen, can I just say on that, because I think this is such an, you know, I think an awareness is really kind of the starting point of having this an advantage that I don't actually feel many founders use, because, you know, if you have an understanding of your psychology as an entrepreneur, you can be so much ahead of most of people out there, because you're going to maximize your potential to make an impact, you know, to drive the results that you want. And at this point of time, only that is going to give you such a huge strategic an advantage over a lot of people who don't actually do that, because our hidden potential is in our psychology. You know, it's not about how many things we do. It's not how many hours we're going to work. It's not how many, I don't know, nights you're going to spend doing that pitch or the presentation. It's not hours of overthinking, over analyzing. It's purely in our psychology. And I think just using that can be such a deal breaker in like literally everything that we do as entrepreneurs. And, you know, and I see it in myself, I see it in my clients, you know, I I've been working nonstop. You know, when I was building my businesses, I would come home. I had like my suitcases packed, literally, because I didn't have even time to unpack them. And I would go from one meeting to another meeting, where I would go from one plane to another plane, because my idea was that I need to work all the time. And that's an addiction as well, right? Workaholism is an addiction. It's how we kind of numb ourselves again from something that we're not kind of able to face in ourselves. And I think just kind of having an understanding of how exhausting that process is, you know, and how unsustainable it is to do that on a long-term basis. And this is, by the way, that's a route to burnout. Just that what I was doing. I think, you know, that's on its own can kind of give a lot of different options
Yeah.
how to
Yeah.
build.
Well, it's only, you know, you can only sustain that for so long. And I think the adrenaline will keep you going and the cortisol will keep you going for a certain length of time, for
Yeah.
sure. But unless you have those kind of support systems around you, as you said, and that understanding of your own strengths and your own weaknesses, and the ability to delegate, and the ability to be okay with not being amazing at absolutely everything, which nobody is, then it, you know, I don't give you very long as a founder, to be honest, because it just becomes completely overwhelming. And I've seen it happen to founders who are very, very close to me. And you know, it is quite heartbreaking because you can see the potential that they've got, but they can't manage their own space. They can't manage their own mind well enough to direct their energy in the best way possible.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to Twane's question, which is going back to something you said earlier, Marina, around, you know, extroverts and introverts. And Twane, do you want to give some context around this? Because this is obviously very relevant to your current business as well.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Marina brought it up. So I coach people that are more introverted, and obviously that was founded in me being an introvert and how I could have done things differently in my career and in life to help me to put myself out there and to be more successful. And being a one-woman show, business development, sales, all of those good things, even putting myself on camera for videos, are part of my reality now. And I'm not in the position to be able to get a co-founder. So I was curious if you have practical advice on how, what was the word? Either, to obviously the more I do it, the easier it becomes. But as you said, it does drain me. So do you have practical advice on how to manage that?
I think, you know, this is such an interesting question, because I think with those things, like with any things, you know, it's important to kind of understand the roots of that. You know, is it kind of that we are more extroverted or introverted, or is it that we're kind of have a specific unresolved fear, like around, for example, being seen, or, you know, what is it? Because I think it could be many things, and it's, you know, it's very kind of difficult to say. I think, you know, some people just generally are kind of personality wise are better suited for the roles where they don't require that. But I'm quite curious that you actually chose something that requires quite a
Practical
lot.
punishment.
So I'm kind of, you know, if I were to put my kind of therapy hat on, I would be kind of curious if there is a part of you that's quite comfortable with doing that, but maybe there's a different part of you that's not, you know, because normally kind of people who are introverted kind of in a pure sense, and I guess it's never a pure sense, but I think they would be kind of, they would avoid, you know, putting themselves in the position where you kind of have to, like, especially business development, God, that's like pure go out there
Did for years.
assertive and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious whether it's actually something that, you know, because if you think about every belief that we have about ourselves is relational, right? Whatever we believe is true about ourselves, we've learned somewhere. You know, you're smart, where have you learned it? You know, you maybe learned it in your family, or maybe you learned because you were good at school, you know, or maybe you learned because your teacher once kind of, you know, so we learn whatever it is that we believe we're good at or not good at through those relationships. And then we carry kind of those beliefs as something that this is just set in stone and it's true, you know. And I think it's also kind of being able to challenge some of those beliefs we have about ourselves that can kind of give us those opportunities. So, you know, I don't kind of know what it is in your case, but I'm quite curious about what seems to be you wanting to do that, but then saying that I don't have that, or it's difficult. But, you know, so it might be exploring that maybe there is a part of you that really kind of feels excited about it, putting yourself there and talking to people and being assertive, you know, and maybe there is a part that doesn't believe you should be doing that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think I just pushed through because my why is bigger than my fear. So my want to help other people
Yeah.
work through that.
But I think often what we feel is fear is also excitement, you know. And I think like we kind of label a lot of things fear or anxiety, where actually it's kind of it's the excitement. But because we're kind of label it like that, we're then struggle with overcoming it, where actually if you were to think I'm excited to be doing that, then it can kind of create a very different like approach as to how you do it. Because, you know, it's interesting because I had kind of a similar story. I started my career in PR and I had a huge fear of public speaking, like, and you know, that's just like a paradox, you know. And then my boss asked me, he was like, why on earth would you go into PR where you actually have to speak in front of this audiences and you have to present a company if you're so scared of public speaking? And I was like, I don't know, you know, that feels like that's paradoxical, you know. And actually it happened that there was a part of me that really wanted to do that. There was a part of me that wanted to be seen, but there was like some part of me that like thought I don't have anything to say that people would want to listen to. You know, I think from that part, I was really, that was like driving my fear and the projections, you know, onto what people are going to think. Is there going to be a judgment? You know, all of those things that we tell ourselves that are important, where actually they're not. You know, you can't control.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you kind of just start to question yourself a bit, isn't it? And just try to, you know, bring it out into the open, which you are amazing at doing, Twane, because you know you're very open about this, and obviously you're creating a business around it to solve this problem for other people. But also, I just think, you know, as you say, you don't have to assume that just because you have a label around something or someone else has given you a label that it has to be forever, or that you can't challenge it, or that you can't find other ways of getting around it. And I think that's something that's so easy to forget, isn't it, on a day-to-day basis? You just forget to challenge your own bullshit, essentially, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's actually a really good technique, you know, when you kind of recognize those narratives and you actually can literally say bullshit to yourself.
Yeah. One of my partners does that. She hears the voices in her head and actually says out loud, stop, just stop.
Yeah.
And, you know, just to kind of have that like full stop of like, oh my God, not this nonsense again, you know. And I think we all need to be more assertive in doing that, actually, and kind of challenging our own, you know, the voices that the things that we tell ourselves, the voices that are in our minds that are trying to limit us, essentially.
Yeah, it's kind of recognizing those cognitive cognitions because they're familiar, right? That story we're telling ourselves is going to be we've been telling this, I don't know, a lot of times. So you recognize it, you can kind of understand what it is. You can even like know the words it speaks, you know, how the voice it speaks, you can give it a shape, whatever, you know, you can give it a name. Maybe it comes in the voice of your mother, maybe it comes in the
I call mine Barbara. Mine's called Barbara, and
Oh,
she's a real pain in the ass.
yeah.
Massive pain in the ass. And I went on a retreat last June, and we all had to write down, what these things were and these kind of negative
Yeah.
things. And I talked about Barbara, and then we got to burn it. So I actually got to burn Barbara in a fire, but
But
unfortunately,
Barbara, no,
I know, but she's still there. Still there.
I
She's not gone away completely, unfortunately.
yeah. But there are no bad parts, right? So all of those parts, behind all of those parts is a good intention. So
Oh, I don't know
yeah,
about that with Barbara.
bring her back in a different
Yeah,
way.
she's still there. We've got kind of 10 minutes left. I mean, we typically run these sessions for about 45 minutes anyway, so we've kind of got over. Wahid, I think you had a question, and if anybody else wants to drop anything into the chat, don't be shy. This is a space for us all to kind of get this stuff out in the open and start to pull it apart a little bit.
Hi. Hi. Maria, just a very quick question from me. I wasn't able to write a message for some reason. I couldn't find the option to do that. But what advice would you give to somebody, Maria, who is trying to identify a business that's aligned with his strengths and values? So I'm not a founder, and I've been working in the corporate career now for quite some time, and I want to transition over into entrepreneurship. So what advice would you give somebody who's trying to do that?
Thank you. I can share an advice I gave to myself, because I really kind of against giving other people an advice on anything, unless but an advice I gave to myself when I was kind of at the stage where I didn't really know what I wanted to do next, when I quit my business and before I started my psychotherapy training, was to follow my curiosity, and to kind of follow my energy and just allow myself to go where this energy and curiosity takes me without actually knowing what's going to be next. And it really happened, and I had no idea if I'm going to have a business within mental health. I had no idea whether I'm going to be a psychotherapist. I didn't really know that, because it was just at that point it was very unclear. But from where I am now, I kind of understand that all my previous experiences came together in actually what makes sense the most for me to do. And I believe all of us have that. I believe kind of all of us have that. Just like that business or an idea that's going to be like really based on your experiences, your personality, your drive, where you want to make an impact and how. I think is just following that curiosity without actually knowing. And just giving yourself permission to do that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the first idea you have is never going to be the final idea. When I sold my business, I had multiple different ideas of where I kind of had a broad sense of where I wanted to go, but it took a few goes and a few different formats to get it into a shape that made sense for other people, right? And that actually solved a genuine problem. And the quicker you can test and trial that, the quicker you'll get to that point. Don't stay married to the solution, stay married to the problem you want to solve, and make sure your strengths and you can do that. You don't have to rely on hiring expensive people or whatever to do it.
And I think as you said, like, clarity comes from moving, clarity comes from actually doing whatever it is that you feel today you're curious about. And I think just we kind of like expect, I know many founders, they're like, oh, I need to have this idea, or I need to have like this exact path to how it's going to work. And they're just like sitting there for so long that this idea just like becomes less and less appealing. So like essentially there's just again like the process of not doing it. And I think just if we allow ourselves to not know and move at the same time, we can just, it can get even better than what you think might happen.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think it's always a leap of faith. You always, whenever you make any kind of big change, whether it's starting a business, whether it's moving countries like I did recently, whether it's, I don't know, getting married, having kids, whatever it might be, there's always a leap of faith of kind of, well, I don't really know how I'm going to deal with all of that, or I don't really know what the reality and the day-to-day of that is, but I back myself enough that I will figure it out. If I want to, I will find a way. And there are always people out there who you can talk to and who will help you. Marina is obviously a very good example of that. Who will just step by step by step by step, you'll get there, but you won't get anywhere unless you take that first kind of leap. The universe will come back and meet you halfway, but you've really got to put yourself out there first.
Yeah, and like an entrepreneurship, and I think life generally, right, is all about how we manage uncertainty, because that's going to define what we're going to do. And I think as soon as we get really comfortable with the uncertainty, the more comfortable we can get with that, the more we're going to be more successful in whatever that entrepreneurial journey that you have.
Yeah, it's like a muscle, isn't it, really? You've just got to keep exercising it and keep growing it, and gradually it just becomes part of your day-to-day and the way that you handle things. Marina, thank you so much for your it's been a fascinating insight, and I think a really, really good reminder, certainly for me anyway, and hopefully for everybody else, that there's so much more that we can do, and we don't need to believe the first version of things that pops up in our brains. We can challenge that, and we should be challenging that as people and as entrepreneurs. And if anyone wants to reach out to you, where could they find you?
LinkedIn. It's easy to find me, but good luck to everyone, and it was wonderful speaking. I hope you took away something that can help you in your journey, and reach out if you kind of have any questions. Thank you so much, Helen, for inviting me. It was fun.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us, and take care, everyone. I will see you all on Monday.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.